Tēnā rangatira, nā hoa mahi. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. A couple of points quickly. We're talking about foresight. Is this because we think it's fun and interesting or challenging even? No, it's because we want action. We want action based on foresight. And that means that we need to involve not just government departments and advisory bodies, we need to involve people. Second point, if we're talking foresight, come on, we're talking climate change. If we don't get action on climate change, our children and our grandchildren will face future challenges I don't want to even think about. And that immediately takes you back to the question of who's involved here. Governments have known for 40 years about climate change. In 1992, New Zealand participated in the Rio Summit and subscribed to the Kyoto Protocol and put in sensible proposals. In 2008, we even got a halfway decent emissions trading scheme. And then the protests. Remember the tractor going up the steps of Parliament protesting against the fart tax? And so the year later, the emissions trading scheme was gutted. And we fell back. And we became slow followers. And now we've got to play catch up. There are crucial elements to getting foresight for action. One is distinguishing between the urgent and the important. Sound simple? In Wellington, we have an urgent demand for a second terrace tunnel and roads through the Basin Reserve. And we have an important issue of reducing fossil fuel emissions. Which way is it going to go? It depends on public awareness, public demand, and votes. You have to get foresight into people's minds. Information. You need an information base for people to understand what it is we're dealing with. You need a positive path forward, a place for people, a base for them to see action that they can take. There's no use preaching doom and gloom. That produces despair. You need a path for action. And then you need trust in fairness, that the costs and benefits will be fairly shared. Let's look at information. In 1982, when the Commission for the Future was abolished, Frank Holmes left the Planning Council and the new Planning Act came into force. It changed the Planning Council's scope from medium term to longer term and put in that we were to monitor and report on the trends and issues facing the social, economic, cultural and environmental development of New Zealand. It was a little job. After morning tea, we thought of something else to do. But we thought, how the hell are we going to do this? Somehow, we've got to get the trends, the longer-term trends, into people's minds. We've got to present them. We've got to keep presenting them. One report doesn't do it. So in the end, we gradually developed all these monitoring groups. The Maori Round Table already existed. Rangi Metakingi was the first leader of that. But you had to have population. We didn't understand what was happening to New Zealand at the time because we hadn't logged the fact that the baby boomers were coming into the generation, the age when they needed jobs. Quite simple, but we weren't aware of it. So all those groups produced reports constantly reminding people of the trends we were going to deal with. If you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're heading. Kia whakatamori, te haere whakamua. You have to know where you're coming from, to know where you're heading, to know whether you need a little course correction or you've got to swing round against the wind. So we worked at that. And Derek Wallace, in his book, refers to it quite well as the idea of facilitative planning, giving people the tools to understand the trends that were going on around them and how to respond to them. Then you need a positive path. Let's see if we can get that up. Yeah. There were lots of these. The CFF did an excellent little futures kit that enabled people to get into the idea of looking at possible alternative futures. At the Planning Council, I remember one of the useful things we did. We had a forecasting program that was looking at changes in the economy and therefore the new jobs, the different mix of jobs that was coming up, which of course meant that you needed different skills. And two bright sparks on the Secretariat, Leslie Haynes and Paul Callister, thought, well, the government's doing this tomorrow's schools bit, let's do tomorrow's skills. And they did that as a report and as a sort of comic book and a video, and they went out and took it around schools. And Tilly Reedy, who was running the Māori Roundtable program, said, hey, iwi and hapu need to see this stuff. So she organised hui a iwi all around the country, and a group of us would go out and spend a day talking over all these trends, the demographics, etc. And it was a pretty educative experience for all of us, I can tell you. There were other things going on like that. There was a nice little report on grassroots initiatives, and Tamati Kruger was involved in that one. So you've got to have that positive path, those ways of showing people that there are things they can do practically. And that's what we must hope will come out of the Climate Change Commission. Finally, we have trust in fairness. This is the difficult one. This is the one I don't hear people talking about enough. If you want people to adapt to change, you have to deal with this. We've become an increasingly unfair society. Inequality of income and particularly wealth has grown to the point where people, normal New Zealanders, don't feel that they've got a fair share of what's going on. You've lost that sense of trust. Wealth, you've got to remember, does give you freedom to choose and the power to resist. We've seen plenty of that. And poverty equals lack of choice. If you're renting, holding down 2 jobs and running a $1,000 banger of a car, what choices have you got? How are you going to change your behaviour for climate change or anything else? If you want change, remember that change favours those who have the power to choose. And the poor will have to have the resources to enable them to change. And I'd come back to what I think Jim Bolger was talking about, the changes of the future of work, and therefore how we distribute income, universal basic income, those sorts of things. Unless we deal with that, we won't get the trust that will bring people behind the changes we need. So, that's the challenges. How do we embed foresight for action? There we are. There's no single institution that's going to do this. You can't expect that a planning council or a commission for the future will do this. We know what Rob Muldoon's reaction was to some of the advice that we gave under the Act we were supposed to use. He wasn't the least bit interested. It's never a single institution. Human institutions change. Some become effective, some become less effective. Different audiences need different approaches. It's got to be much more widespread. You certainly need futures in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, where the contracts are written between chief executives and ministers. You need it in Treasury, and some of the work that Treasury's doing has been great, with the wellbeing framework and I've forgotten the term now, but there's been a lot of good work broadening that. Every ministry has to be preparing the longer-term trends and the challenges those bring up in their own area and how they're going to respond to climate change. Local government already is required now to produce long-term plans, but they have to be energised, people have to become involved in them. And then outside government, there's scope for more institutions that need to take on this role. The McGuinness Institute is a good example, and I've got to say, Wendy, that it's been great to see what you've managed to do, particularly bringing young people into it. And that is crucial. We're talking about future here. We need more youth out on the streets saying, it's our future and we'll vote about it. And that will create the political room for the parties to get on and actually do something about it. Because after all, in the end, what's the most important thing? He aha te mea nui. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Tēnā tātou katoa.